Two, one. Hey everybody, welcome to the Inside Cafe. My name is 𝗔𝗯𝗶𝗵𝗵. I'm your host, and today, I'm inviting my good friend back, Michael Hines. And you and me had a conversation recently where we talked about perhaps a problem in education on Zoom, right? Of people, both teachers and students, and maybe parents burning out with putting their kids on Zoom, because in Thailand we're in COVID lockdown for the second year. And perhaps there's some premises there that no one's really talking about or how to solve, right? How do you get kids to be more engaged on Zoom, and perhaps teachers even when they might not have been so prepared to be engaging online when they're used to the classrooms? I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Well, first, thanks for having me back. And I'm not going to touch on the irony that we're going to talk about Zoom burnout while on a Zoom call.
Not irony at
all. But yeah, I mean, we're going into year 2. And obviously it served a purpose when this first happened. I mean, there was a huge transition that we needed to make for remote learning, just for safety's sake. But there's a lot of work that goes into this. And Zoom burnout, when you're staring at the screen, the teacher's trying to teach and they've got 10, 20, 30 students, no camera, no microphone, just staring at a blank screen. It really takes a lot out. So trying to find, now that we're going into year 2, something different, an alternative to this constant barrage of Zoom appointments that children are having to go through. Because even the parents are starting to notice and become exhausted from this never-ending Zoom schedule.
I wonder what are the opportunities here to think about, because it's one of those problems where everybody has to deal with just being on Zoom all the time, right? And especially if you're a student who's used to interacting with friends and being in the classroom, and especially for teachers, what do you think the opportunities are for helping teachers be more engaging and helping students be more engaged in their learning?
And you hit that word, is exactly what we're talking about, because every teacher knows the best learning is when the student is engaged. And the difficulty we're having is with Zoom, they're not engaged. They are not taking an active part in the lesson. So, one of the things that we're looking at, like what I was looking at, was designing a more, if you want to say holistic or 360-degree ecosystem for learning that allows for both online and offline or in the classroom. And it can easily transition either way. So providing the teachers with tools and resources for the students to literally flip a remote class where they are learning and doing the back end information or the lecture or, the necessary information the students need. They're getting that online, self-access, self-paced, video, different activities, etc. So then they go online and the teacher says, okay, we're going to schedule a Zoom. We're all going to get together. And then at that point, it becomes about active learning. They start applying what they've already know, or the teacher is taking time to help them through difficult concepts that they've identified where they're having a problem.
I wonder if, I'm thinking now, this probably could be used in the workplace too, right? Because think, right, because meetings in the workplace are often not super engaging in the first place. So I wonder if perhaps a teacher.
So basically you're saying the whole world is having Zoom burnout. Doesn't matter where you're at.
Yeah.
So, or Google Meets.
Yeah. I wonder for you, for a teacher who didn't have perhaps the resources that you were talking about, what are some of the things they could do to up engagement with themselves and their students? Like, what were the things they could look out for?
Well, one is making sure that, for example, when they're having that Zoom meeting or when they're meeting with the children, there's got to be something that children are going to be doing. So every teacher knows there's a time where we have to impart information. we have to explain, the math concept or the theorem or whatever it is, or the stages of cell division, whatever it is we're having to impart before we start into some sort of activity or problem-based learning, right? So the teacher needs to find a way to flip that to allow for the students to get and absorb all the information they need without the teacher using the precious face time, I guess, or video conferencing time on that kind of explanation. So then the minute the students get in, this, the teacher's providing them a real world example or saying, hey, let's all work on this together. And I know we have the ability, not, with Zoom, but, for example, we have a live class in our app that allows for breakout. It allows them to work in groups. It allows them to interact. So then the students are actually doing things online with the teacher rather than absorbing information. Because teachers tend to fall back on lecture because it's a huge amount of work to prepare all these resources that they're going to need in order to flip that the way the classroom works.
I'm thinking I'm gonna go left. I wonder, or just set up for you to share your experiences. I think we could look at the nature of engagement, right? Because that's what we're pointing to. And I think I realize that we all might have different definitions of engagement. So I'd love for you to share, like, to you, like what's engagement to you, and what's the most engaged you've been in a classroom, both as a student, as a teacher?
Well, for example, engaged to me is to be active, to be involved, to take part in, not to just passively receive it. And a prime example I would give is one time I was teaching economics, right? And, we had to study all the different parts of economics and macroeconomics, microeconomics, et cetera. But it was about product marketing and return on investment and profit margins and et cetera, and all these different things. And I thought they would find that boring, which they didn't. They found it fascinating. But I had to give them this information so they knew about it. But then what I did is I said, now what we're going to do is taking all that information, you're going to divide into teams. And one of you is going to be marketing, one of you is going to be sales, one of you is going to be product design, and one of you is going to be project manager for the timelines and the budgets. And you're going to design a product, and then you're going to present it to the class. And every student in the class got 500 class dollars that they could spend. And then people will vote by buying your product after you've done your pitch. So you're going to explain it, go through the process. And as a teacher, you're going to tell me the boring stuff, the project management stuff, how you got there. And then there's going to be a sales pitch, and there's going to be some marketing material that you're going to do. So that's what I'm talking about, taking all that time that we had spent maybe in the classroom talking about project management and marketing and messaging and, whatever it is that goes along with launching a product. All that can be done remotely, self-access with video, even if the teacher just records a lecture and says, go watch this. Because when we get on Zoom, that's when I'm going to start talking about pitching your ideas. You're going to ask me if you have any questions. Are you having problems? And then when we get on Zoom, you're going to be pitching your product. So I'm going to have you share your screen, and you're going to go through your little marketing spiel. You're going to do your commercial for the students. That is much more engaging, where the student is now the one presenting. The student is the one who's actively involved.
What occurred to me is because it sounded like you were very engaged too, to begin with, in that class. And, I just realized something. You know how when you're going on a trip, the way there, like a road trip, the way there seems much longer than the way back, especially if it's somewhere new. And I realized it's because on the way there, it's new and it's unknown, and your brain is very alert. Like, where are we? What are we doing? Are we there yet? But on the way back, that part of it kind of shuts down, where you're like, you're not really as aware of those things. And I'm thinking, what occurs to me is when we're thinking about the nature of engagement, it's helping people tap into that unknown, right? Like, so the students don't know where they're going. They're a lot more alert compared to like a textbook or just reading off information. I think especially in Asia, that's an area where teachers could hugely benefit of perhaps tapping into their innate creativity to,
And that's it.
right.
Creative thinking, getting them to actively use their critical and creative thinking.
Right.
To
So
apply what they just learned.
So let's make that bridge to you, because if engagement, if really one of the secrets behind engagement is creativity as a teacher, what do you think about that? How would you help teachers or education facilitators or educators tap into their creativity to be more engaging in classrooms?
Well, again, active learning, problem-based learning.
Problem-based learning.
If you give the teachers the time, because again, we mentioned this in the last time we talked, that all teachers say, I just don't have enough time. There's so much they are responsible for that it becomes a little overwhelming. Now, when they are in their environment of the classroom, they know what they're doing. They know their time allotted. They know how to manage all this stuff. And there's direct contact. But what happens when you take the classroom out of the equation and nobody's in the classroom? Or you're doing this, like there was times where they were back in school, then they were out of school. Half the kids were coming to school, half were learning from, they were trying all these different mixes. And I could empathize with the teachers probably saying, oh my God, this is so difficult. Now, wait a minute, who's going to be in the classroom and who's going to be at home? Now, and they're having to juggle all this different stuff. So giving the teachers the time to say, okay, let's take this off your plate. The assessing the students, for example, we have, formative and summative assessments, teachers all know this. So we're taking some of that, some of the, even though it's student-centered, some of the lecture, some of the base learning of what they need to know before they do this. So let's say it's math and it's learning about how to find area, right? So the lecture of how to find the area of circles or rectangles or triangles or whatever it is, that's all done via video from the LMS, from the eLearning app, right? So when the teacher comes in, she might say, okay, everybody, here's what we're going to do. I've given you all the project. I want you all to be presenting your bedroom. You were designed your new bedroom and you were given, you could use any furniture you want. And here are the 5 pieces of furniture. A bed is a rectangle and it's this many square meters. And, your nightstand is round or something like that. Right. So then they start from a basic grid, they start to design their bedroom, having to know how much area this is taking up. So if I have a bedroom that's 3 meters by 6 meters, I know how much room I have to work with. Right? I have 18 square meters. How am I going to decorate it? That's a problem-based learning. That's where the students are actively engaged and they're producing something by applying what they've already learned.
So what I heard in that is from the teachers educated side is to get really good at thinking of problems for kids to solve or students to solve.
Yeah. Actually, there's a lot out there they can choose from. Teachers help each other. So
yeah. I was thinking about the most engaged I've ever been on a Zoom thing. So I was doing one of my mentors, Michael Neal. He has a 3-day intensive called Genius Catalyst, and it was 3 days online. Like it was like a whole day online, right? So, but for me, it was like 3 days, full days. From, I guess in American time, it was 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. But for me, it was like 10 p.m. to no, it was like no, it was like 11 a.m. to like 5 a.m. But for 3 days. But I stayed on it for 3 days, and I thought about
I couldn't do that.
What made me stay on, and something really cool. I think it was Michael Neal's daughter and his family who created this, because it was about creativity and tapping into it and like catalyzing your genius. And what they did was they did a whole escape room via Google Documents, and we were like 300 adults, and we loved it. There were like passwords, you had to figure it out in groups, you had to call, you had to like email the email and like the picture, and it was the best thing I've ever seen on Zoom.
Yeah.
And then
And you remember it,
I
and you
remember
probably learned a lot from
I
it.
learned a lot too. I
To
learned,
this day.
yeah. And then we came back and we discussed, how did you solve this, or what about this made sense? And then I think the other days there were they did like a live murder mystery on Zoom, where like there was like actors and there were like characters, like one guy died, we had to like figure it out, like who killed who, and we had to look at the clues. But as you can see, like I remember every detail of that thing because it was so engaging to my brain to try and solve things and fix things. And I guess what I'm hearing from you is
But
you're
on
really
that, I'm guessing, by the way, you spent your time online with the group doing this. I'm guessing that he provided a lot of, or some material and information prior to this for you to prepare yourself. There was probably information or things to read or videos to watch saying, okay, welcome to our 3-day. Here's our schedule and what we're going to do. And to prepare yourself, here's a little bit of information. Did they, a lot of people provide this event information to kind of get you prepped for it.
Yeah, we had some, but we had no idea we were going to do a live escape room or a live murder mystery. Like it was all, so that I think that's an element of engagement, is surprise. Because I think to me, I think we're designed innately to, or our brains, like our functional brains, designed to kind of fear surprise, because back in the day, like if you were surprised by a saber-toothed tiger, you would be dead. Like, oh, surprise, you did. So I think when we're surprised, there's something happens in our brains where we're more alert. We're like, danger, or it's okay, and there's that too. So I wonder for
I think
you.
also, by the way, when you're doing something, I'm sure when you had projects or you get involved,
right,
you're doing something, time starts to not matter. It just flies. You don't even realize because you're so engaged in what you're doing.
Right.
And that's what I want teachers to be able to focus on, to have the time to do that when they're connecting online via Zoom, not giving all that background information or the things that they need. Because if you want them to do a project on even Google Docs, let's say, or Area, or whatever it is, you have to make sure they understand Google Docs or Area.
Right.
So that can be the remote self-access. So then the teacher's like, hi, kids. So I know you've been studying X all week.
Right.
Guess what we're going to do today? We are all going to. And then you bring that surprise project.
So given that your expertise is in technology and education, how would you foster more creativity and engagement into your work or into your services that you provide? Like if this is like the gold we're talking about, right? Like how would you bring that into what you do and give to the world?
Well, very easy. Like I said, we designed a system that is all encompassing. So when we looked at this, we said, okay, we're going to make 3D explainer videos that are pretty, right? But they kind of introduce the kids to a topic like cells or something, and they're fun to watch. They're beautiful, and maybe a few pop-up questions to make sure they're really listening, right? But it's only about 2 minutes. Then we go into a teaching video where you have an animated character, and it's literally walking them through the textbook that we made that mirrors this. So the teacher or the animated character is now teaching them the concepts, and then we say, okay, let's do a practice problem. And they do the practice problem, and then the animated character says, let's go through this step by step. It shows them so they can compare their answer. So that element of the teaching part of it is taken away from the teacher so they have more time. So these are the kind, and we do pre and post tests so they understand that there is a summative assessment, right? Formative, at the very beginning, we test their knowledge, and at the end, we test it again. So the teacher can then track their development and track their progress. So then what happens is all of that is taken out of the teacher's hands. And the students log in, and the teacher gets reports that shows them how they're doing and what they're doing. So then all the teacher has to focus on is, how am I going to engage them online? And we even built in a live classroom where they can schedule it. And even a teacher PowerPoint, if they want to, if they say, oh, I noticed everybody was having problems with this. So I'm going to take 5 seconds to go over this, and then we're going to start our project. So that's what we're doing. We're giving them all the tools to take all these responsibilities away from them so they can focus on the fun activities to do together with kids.
That's really important, because what I just realized is, there's nothing more crushing to creativity and innovation than overwhelm. Like, your brain just doesn't go there, especially if you're overwhelmed and you're overworked, or you have Zoom burnout. Your brain just, I think your mind, not your mind, you don't have the bandwidth for fun and creativity, because it's just right.
And it's not even work. I mean, a lot of people, this Zoom burnout, or these kind of burnouts, if you're just talking, it's, at the end, you're like, wow, I'm really tired. Someone said it's exhausting to have to smile too much.
I'm thinking like in, I remember, like, because being in a live classroom, like, you're only in a classroom for like an hour, and then you get to walk to the next one. So you physically get to move your body and then, like, maybe take a break. But on Zoom, it's like, okay, back in the chair, right? And like, in the break, like, where are you going to walk to? The front of the house, back. And so some countries, because we're speaking about Thailand specifically, are like lockdown, right? But some countries are kind of coming out of it. What would you say to that? Like, because it seems to me that because schools have come online, those are also opportunities, because now maybe places that don't have access to schools can still access great or high quality education. What would you say to that, to the countries who are coming out of lockdown, like America or the UK?
Well, it's exactly the same premise. But instead of using your Zoom time or live class time to do this,
right,
say, I'm going to use my in-class time. So again, this is the truly flipped classroom model, where they have all the online materials and everything done, and the students are prepping themselves with background information and etc. So then when they come into the classroom, the teacher might say, all right, everybody, here's a pair of scissors, paper plate, and whatever. Here's what we're going to do. And so it's now applying what they've already done. So when they get into the classroom, it's a lot of projects, a lot of problem-based activities, or it's the teacher saying, okay, while everyone's doing this, she's now using the information she got from the lecture and the pre and post test, etc., to walk over to an individual student and say, Billy, by the way, I noticed you were having problems with X or Y. Do you want to talk to me about it? Instead of saying, so it's very targeted, where she can say, everybody else work on this. Can I see Bobby, Susie, Billy, and Tommy? All right, you all were having a little problem, so we're going to take about 5 minutes together. And then they go on and do their activities, something like that. Right. So it's no need to get rid of all this. Use the same tool and do the same thing in class that you were doing on Zoom. Make sense?
Right. So it's an even higher level of more personalized engagement. Especially because I teach Taekwondo, right? And for me, it's easy because we can just tell with our eyes, like, which student's having trouble with what, and we can kind of go over. I'm like, okay, we're gonna do a few adjustments to your leg and your angle of kicking. And I guess with if it's in the classroom, on Zoom, that's quite hard, but it'd be so helpful to have data information to point to the students that actually need help. And that's really good. That's really important in Asia too, because we have a premise here that to not know is to be stupid. To not know is to look bad or lose face. So to have teachers to kind of bypass that cultural obstacle, if you will, it could be so helpful.
But it's also the same idea that when you're in university, this kind of responsibility for your learning, taking more responsibility. you can do that a little bit with students because, when you're in university, your professor doesn't go over everything. Your professor says, next week, we're going to be talking about blah, blah, blah. And I need you to read and understand pages 1 through 100.
Actually,
So be ready.
Yeah. I went to American University in Washington, D.C., Kogot School of Business, and I had a really, really hard time adjusting to to what you just described. Because, in the British schools, they were so thorough with the content. But in America, it was like you had to be a lot more responsible for yourself learning. And I didn't know that. So I was like this wasn't in this, like I was taking a quiz, like this wasn't in the text, like you didn't talk about this at all. It's like, oh, you're supposed to do it on your own. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot more responsibility for your own learning.
So I
and
wonder,
that's a good thing,
right?
Because that
Right.
builds lifelong learners.
So I wonder if I think through what you're providing or through what you're pointing to is creating that at a very young age to be responsible for your own learning. Because I can see how that could be helpful in all areas.
Yep. Helping them to become more confident in their learning, to become lifelong learners, more self-reliant, and at the same time providing teachers with more tools to where they can not reinvent, but the classroom becomes a place for activities and things for people to do. And it's the same thing, even, you talked about adults and corporations. There's a lot of that they have to get through. You've got to know our procedures and our rules, etc. And I've seen this done for a friend of mine. I designed a course for home healthcare, right? So they have to learn all these things. But then when they come in, they actually practice. They have a little dummy laying on the bed and say, okay, now I want you to practice how to do, to draw blood, or I want you to practice how to take their blood pressure.
Right.
So they actually apply what they've already learned outside the classroom. Corporations can do the same thing.
Right. I imagine, well, even if you shift perspective to the workplace, how to help them be more engaged. And that's a cool premise. So I'm thinking like how, working in corporate, you're solving problems, but it's not for learning. It's solving like kind of maybe real world problems. But I can see how it would be helpful to someone to continue that learning kind of level of engagement of learning new things through problem solving. Right? Like most trainings are quite boring because it's information intake.
But you went to a training and it wasn't students, it was adults.
Right.
Training you were mentioning.
Right.
But he did the same premise of when we meet, it's going to be active. It's going to be problem based.
So with that training, that was self-learning because it was like I paid money to go to that training. So I made a decision. But I'm thinking in corporate where you don't really get that decision. It's like, okay, everybody, we're learning this and intake information versus really interactive levels of learning like you're pointing to.
Well, I think inherently all people want to improve. You know what I mean? If they find there's value and it's helping them, improving them, then they'll want it.
Right.
But you've got to make sure that, and again, going right back to our very beginning, if you don't engage them in their learning, they're not going to find value in it. They're going to find it to be a chore, something they just have to get through and get over with. So, and the best way to engage is to personalize it and have them become involved in it and to take responsibility for even a project. Like I was talking about economics. They design the product, they decide what it was going to be. So they took the whole thing. They simply took what I had taught them and they applied it to something that had interest to them. And they made some pretty amazing products that I was like, and they still remember this, like you were talking about after our last video, there was a student who contacted you who I had taught years ago.
Right.
These students, I'm sure, will one day be talking to a friend like you were talking about the event you went to for 3 days. I'm sure there's some student that's going to say, I remember that economics project. We made a project about a floating bed or something like that. I mean, they had some most amazing products that I'd ever seen. So
right. I think it's also, I think engagement to me now, it seems it's also creating space for that alchemical, bubbly stuff to come up with cool shit, like floating beds.
Cool stuff.
cool stuff, right? Cool stuff.
Yes.
But
And that's all
yeah.
about just, again, getting them interested. And it can be done on Zoom. And I think it will have a huge impact on this burnout we're all facing.
Right. So let's summarize the points I think we've covered so far. So you can help me with this. So what I got from today so far is engage, like, to answer the problem of like how do you deal with Zoom burnout or maybe like learning burnout for students and teachers, it's looking at upping engagement. And what I've come to see in this conversation is underneath engagement is creativity that fuels engagement and helping students to engage them in problem solving, engage them in walking them into the unknown or throwing them to the unknown, if you will, and letting them figure it out. But like in my world, we call it throwing a student in the swimming pool. You're throwing them in the swimming pool, but you're standing on the side watching.
Yeah. But it's also about giving them responsibility, but at the same time giving them choice.
Personalization I got from you, and ownership, right? Yeah.
Personalization, ownership is a good word. So you're giving them that kind of ownership. So then they take responsibility for it and they become more engaged. The analogy about standing beside the pool and throwing, that's how I learned how to swim. So that's not a good one for me. I hated that way. That's how they taught me how to swim, and it was horrible.
Or they just threw you in the pool?
Yeah, I had to take responsibility or drown. So that was my learning environment.
That's a tough choice, Michael. Well, interestingly, that's how we kind of teach in Taekwondo how kids to do physical combat at the ages of 5. You know, we put on their armor and stuff and like, all right, have at it. You know, this other kid's gonna kick you. And something interesting happens is like this kind of innate survival instinct kicks in and the kid kicks back.
The kid goes all Mad Max.
Sometimes.
We used to have the trash can lid and the stick. That's what we would do.
Yeah, but in Taekwondo, it's interesting because I think even the kids surprise themselves because then because we create that safe environment, right, where they're not they're not in threat of any real harm or damage, and then their creativity comes to play because the problem they're solving is the person in front of them who's also trying to solve them, and it becomes very engaging.
And we're going to get off on a tangent. So
yeah,
we were in summary. Number 1 was engagement.
Engagement.
Number 2,
creativity.
And I would say also part of the summary that's very important. All of this is dependent on support for the teacher. You know, you can have engagement and creativity, but the teacher needs some sort of support with resources, delivery systems, etc., to actually make the flipped classroom, if they're going back to school, or the flipped classroom online with Zoom. Without that support, this is just adding more weight and more responsibility onto a teacher, which is not fair.
Right. And so it's true. It's like you can't expect the educator to really be at their best if they're overwhelmed and overworked. Like there's zero space for creativity and engagement because they just want to get through the day, like anybody would.
Yeah. They've got 1,000 things on their to-do list, and they don't have time to, to engage their own creativity on how to engage the students.
So the secret is
got so much responsibility.
And the secret is to support them, to have more space to be creative and engaged.
Yes.
Well, I think anybody listening to this is going to get a lot of value, whether you're an educator or provider of education. Right. So lastly, I'd love to help remind people where they can get these solutions. Where can they meet with you or talk with you or find out more?
Online, icongroupthailand.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn. It's Michael G. Hines. So it's and I'm always available to answer people's questions. I have a lot of people come to me, and like I've told you, I love to talk, so I have no problem if they want to ask me something. So, but they can find more information there. And if they want, I can send them more information on what we've designed to specifically deal with the problem of giving that teacher the freedom to be able to then engage in more creative activities by taking all that responsibility on ourselves to say, here, let us help you. Here's everything you need, from textbook to PowerPoint to videos to assessment to whatever it is you need. We've done it all for you. So now you spend your time with your kids or your students. Kids if you're homeschooling, students if you're...
Yeah, this actually works for parents too, if you're homeschooling kids. Like this is a really good conversation for...
And there's a lot of parents that have reached a limit. They're saying that's enough. I'm going to take my kids and I'm going to start homeschooling them. So, but yes, I hope someone does find this valuable. And as always, it was great talk. I love talking to you. So.
Wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time, and we will speak soon. And for everybody watching, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. There, I did it. First call to action. All right, I'll see you later, Michael. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.